I am Clara Hayes, 27 years old, and the exact moment my mother smiled while stripping away the last ounce of my dignity was the moment I finally understood a bitter truth. I had spent my entire life auditioning for a role that was never actually available to me, the role of a beloved daughter. It happened on a Tuesday night, in the formal dining room of my parents' house. The air was thick with the smell of an expensive roast and the suffocating scent of my twin sister's designer perfume. I sat at the edge of the mahogany table, nursing a glass of water, while my parents and my sister Vanessa practically vibrated with excitement. They were discussing her upcoming wedding to Preston Sterling, a corporate lawyer with a trust fund, a blindingly white smile, and the kind of old money last name my mother had spent decades trying to attach to her own. To them, this wedding was not a celebration of love. It was a coronation. For the past 2 hours, I had listened to them gush over imported orchids from South America, a 10-tier champagne tower, a custom silk gown that cost more than my first car, and a private estate venue that was notoriously impossible to book. They were throwing out numbers that made absolutely no sense for a family whose boutique business was heavily reliant on seasonal foot traffic. I let them talk, let them build their little castle in the sky, until I finally asked the one practical question that brought the entire room to a dead, echoing halt. I looked at my father and said, "If you are spending this heavily on the venue and the florals, what exactly does that mean for the foundation fund?" The clinking of silverware stopped. My father suddenly found his wine glass fascinating. Vanessa looked down at her manicured nails, but I could see the corner of her mouth twitching. Then, my mother sighed. She leaned back in her upholstered chair, gave me a look of exhausted pity, and smiled like she was explaining basic math to a slow toddler. "Clara, be realistic," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Preston's family is in a different league. We have to make a certain impression. Your sister is stepping into a world where image is everything. The entire fund has been reallocated to Vanessa's wedding." I stared at her. The foundation fund was supposed to be a sacred trust. It was money our late grandmother had set aside for both of us, split evenly, to be used to start our adult lives. I had spent years quietly funneling my own paychecks from my college part-time jobs into that account to build up my half, believing it was the one safe thing in my life. "Reallocated?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. "You mean you spent my half of grandmother's money, and the thousands of dollars I contributed myself, on her party, and you were not going to tell me?" My mother waved a hand in the air dismissively. "We all make sacrifices for the family, Clara. When you and Julian eventually get married, it will be a simple, quiet little thing anyway. You do not run in the same circles. You have to understand. Diamonds and gravel do not hold the same value, darling." Vanessa actually laughed. A short, breathy giggle that cut through the silence like a knife. She laughed because humiliating me was the entertainment they had all been waiting for. For a fraction of a second, the room went terrifyingly still. I think they expected an explosion. My entire childhood I had been provoked just like this, pushed into a corner until I reacted, so they could point their fingers and call me dramatic, jealous, or unstable. They wanted me to scream. They wanted me to cry over the stolen money so Vanessa could play the victim and tell Preston how unsupportive her sister was. But as I looked at the three of them, something deep inside my chest simply shut off. The desperate, aching need to be loved by these people evaporated. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I did not give them the theatrical scene they craved. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. I picked up my purse, grabbed my keys from the side table, and looked right into my mother's eyes. "Clara, sit down," my father commanded, trying to salvage his authority. "Do not ruin this evening with your attitude." I did not say a word. I turned my back on them, walked out the front door, and drove away into the night. My phone started ringing before I even hit the highway. I put it on silent and drove the 3 hours back to my apartment in the city, feeling nothing but a strange, icy clarity. When I woke up the next morning, my phone screen was a war zone. I had over 100 missed calls, 60 from my mother, 30 from Vanessa, and a dozen texts from my father. The voicemails ranged from angry demands that I apologize for walking out to panicked pleas telling me I was overreacting. I sat at my kitchen counter, drinking my coffee, and read through Vanessa's latest text. "You are so selfish. You always try to ruin my moments. Answer the phone. You are stressing mom out." I set my mug down, typed out a single reply, and sent it to a group chat with the three of them. Do not beg the gravel to save your crown. To understand why that one sentence sent my family into an absolute breathless panic by noon, you have to understand what my family had actually stolen from me. Because it was not just the money. Vanessa had not just taken my half of the fund to pay for her extravagant aesthetic. She had taken something far more valuable, something she lacked the intelligence to build herself. She had stolen my professional blueprint, and she was about to find out exactly what happens when you build a luxury mansion on a foundation made of stolen gravel. To understand how we reached the point of no return, you have to look back at the twisted mechanics of the Hayes family household. From the time Vanessa and I were old enough to speak, the dynamic was permanently set in stone. We may have shared a face, but that was where the similarities violently ended. Vanessa was a performer. She was loud, demanding, and thrived on the kind of dramatic emotional displays that made our parents drop everything to cater to her. If she failed a test, the teachers were unfair. If she broke a rule, she cried so hysterically that my mother would end up apologizing to her just to soothe her nerves. Vanessa learned very early that vulnerability, or at least the performance of it, was currency. I was the opposite. I was quiet, observant, and deeply practical. I liked order. I liked knowing how things worked and fixing them when they did not. But in a family that operated entirely on theatrical emotion, my stability was treated as a character flaw. My mother called me cold. My father called me difficult. Whenever I asked for basic fairness, I was told I was being exhausting. Whenever I achieved something, it was never celebrated. If I brought home a perfect report card, won a debate tournament, or secured an academic scholarship, the reaction was never pride. It was always a hushed, irritated warning. My mother would pull me aside and whisper, "Do not gloat, Clara. You know Vanessa struggles with her confidence. Why do you always have to make your sister feel inadequate?" That was the box they put me in. My successes were viewed as direct attacks on Vanessa's self-esteem. I was the sturdy, unlovable workhorse. She was the fragile, beautiful porcelain doll that needed constant protection. The only person who saw through the toxic fog of our house was my maternal grandmother. She was a pragmatic, sharp-witted woman who recognized exactly what my parents were doing to me. When we turned 16, she set up the foundation fund. She deposited a substantial amount of money into a trust, legally divided into 2 equal halves for our future. I will never forget the day she told me about it. She pulled me into her kitchen, her frail hand gripping my wrist with surprising strength, and looked me dead in the eye. "They will try to rewrite your reality, Clara," she told me. "They will try to convince you that you deserve less. But they cannot rewrite this. This money is your anchor. No matter what happens, this will be the one thing no one can ever take from you." I held on to those words like a life raft. When my grandmother passed away a year later, that fund became my holy grail. It was the only tangible proof I had that someone in my bloodline believed I deserved an equal share of happiness. While Vanessa spent her high school and college weekends shopping with my mother's credit cards and chasing popularity, I worked. I took grueling shifts at a local catering company, bussing tables, hauling bags of ice, and learning the brutal, exhausting logistics behind high-end events. Every spare dollar I earned, every tip I received, went straight into my half of the foundation fund. I did not buy nice clothes. I did not go on spring break trips to Cabo. I poured my blood, sweat, and youth into that account because every deposit felt like purchasing a brick for the fortress I was building to protect my independence. I wanted to know that when I finally walked down the aisle one day, I would be stepping into a future that I had secured for myself. It sounds naive now. When you grow up starved for basic affection, you become an expert at building hope out of scraps. You take the smallest sign of fairness and treat it like proof that maybe, eventually, your family will love you the way they love the golden child. Because I was desperate for their approval, I became incredibly useful. It was my tragic survival mechanism. If I could not be loved, I would make myself indispensable. I fixed the things they broke. I organized the chaos they created. Over the years, I became the invisible engine that kept the Hayes family from completely falling apart. I did not realize that by being so capable, I was training them to view me not as a human being, but as an unlimited resource, a utility closet they could raid whenever they needed something fixed, planned, or funded. I thought the foundation fund was untouchable. I thought it was the one boundary they would never cross. I had no idea that while I was busy building my career and securing my future, my parents had legally bypassed the trust stipulations. They had quietly drained my years of hard work, my grandmother's final gift, and handed it all to Vanessa to fund a single day of shallow, performative vanity. But taking my money was only the beginning. Vanessa did not just want my savings, she wanted my mind. She wanted the perfect life I had meticulously mapped out, and as the wedding planning began, she was about to commit an act of intellectual theft so blatant it would finally give me the permission I needed to burn their entire fantasy to the ground. The easiest way to understand the stark difference between Vanessa and me as adults is this: I built reality. She curated fiction. After college, I moved to the city and turned my grueling years of catering experience into a legitimate career. I became a senior operations manager for a premier event production firm. I was the person they called when a floral shipment caught fire 3 hours before a millionaire's reception, or when a high-profile bride had a meltdown over the seating chart. I knew the ironclad language of vendor contracts, the exact profit margins on luxury catering, and just how much money people were willing to burn to make strangers on the internet envy them. I built a life that was quiet, demanding, and beautifully mine. And that is where I met Julian. Julian was an architect consulting on the structural integrity of a historic estate my firm was using for a gala. During a freak thunderstorm that knocked out the venue's power, while everyone else was running around screaming, Julian was calmly taping flashlights to the brass chandeliers to create ambient lighting. We spent the rest of the night laughing in a dark hallway, eating leftover hors d'oeuvres. He was grounded, intensely kind, and possessed a quiet confidence that did not require an audience. For the first time in my life, I found a home in a person who did not need me to fix his messes just to earn my keep. Vanessa, unsurprisingly, took a completely different path. She tried a dozen different aesthetic careers: a lifestyle blogger, a boutique fitness instructor, a personal shopper, abandoning each one the second it required actual labor. But her true talent was networking in the right zip codes. That is how she caught Preston Sterling. Preston was a junior partner at a law firm, but his real resume was his trust fund. He was handsome in a sterile, catalog kind of way, and cared about his social standing above all else. He did not love Vanessa. He acquired her. She looked stunning in a cocktail dress and knew exactly how to flatter his senior partners. My parents acted like she had just won the Nobel Peace Prize when he proposed. Overnight, the Hayes household transformed into a wedding war room, and almost immediately, my phone started ringing. My mother suddenly remembered my existence, calling me constantly with quick questions. Could I look over this catering contract? Could I recommend a lighting designer? Did I know anyone at the Botanical Gardens who could bypass the 2-year wait list? I should have said no. I knew better. But a lifetime of conditioning is hard to break, and I foolishly thought that if I helped them, maybe they would finally treat me with a shred of professional respect. So, I made the calls. I put my own hard-earned reputation on the line. I got them a temporary hold on an exclusive venue through a massive professional favor. I connected them with a top-tier floral designer who offered a steep discount using my corporate referral code. I vouched for them with a luxury transportation service, personally promising that the Hayes family was good for the money. They built the foundation of their high society fantasy entirely on my back. But exploiting my contacts was not enough for Vanessa. She needed my vision. For years, as an event planner, I had kept a private, encrypted digital portfolio. It was a master blueprint of my own dream wedding. I had spent countless late nights drafting it. It detailed a highly specific, breathtakingly elegant aesthetic, suspended installations of white wisteria, a very particular asymmetrical lighting design, a bespoke menu tailored around a hyperlocal farm-to-table concept, and a customized floor plan that encouraged intimacy over spectacle. It was my masterpiece, the culmination of everything I loved about my industry, waiting for the day Julian and I were ready. One weekend, while visiting my parents, I left my laptop open on the kitchen island to take a phone call in the yard. I was gone for 10 minutes. A month later, Vanessa started posting her vision boards on social media. I was sitting in my office when a colleague, who followed Vanessa's influencer account, showed me her latest post. My blood ran completely cold. There it was, my suspended wisteria design, my custom lighting schematic, my exact menu concept, right down to the signature infused cocktails. She had not just taken inspiration, she had literally downloaded my private blueprint and was parading it in front of Preston, his wealthy family, and her thousands of followers as her own brilliant creative genius. She was receiving endless praise online for her impeccable taste. I confronted her immediately. I called her and demanded to know why she stole my intellectual property. Her response was so casually cruel it still echoes in my mind. "Oh, Clara, relax," she scoffed, dismissing my anger entirely. "It is just a party format. You are always so territorial. Besides, Mom said you and Julian could never afford to execute a design like this anyway. Why let it go to waste on a computer screen when I can actually bring it to life? We are family. We share." She hung up on me. She stole my blueprint because she was empty. She had the groom, the audience, and the stolen money, but she lacked the soul and the talent to create something beautiful herself. So she took mine. I sat in my office, staring at my dark phone screen. That was the exact moment the final thread snapped. I realized they did not just view me as a resource. They viewed me as a donor. My money, my contacts, my creativity, it was all theirs for the taking, simply because they believed my life was less valuable than hers. They had my money, they had my designs, they had my vendors. What they did not realize was that a foundation built entirely on someone else's name can be demolished with a single keystroke. And as I drove to my parents' house for that fateful dinner, the one where my mother would call me gravel, I already knew exactly how I was going to hit delete, which brings us back to that Tuesday night. The night my mother smiled, called me gravel, and expected me to shatter into a million pieces. As I stood up from the mahogany dining table, the silence in the room was suffocating. My mother's triumphant smirk faltered just a fraction when she saw my face. She expected tears. She expected a shouting match that she could easily twist into a narrative of my bitter, unhinged jealousy to tell all her country club friends. "Clara, sit down," my father had commanded, his voice shaking with the weak authority of a man who knew he had just been caught committing a massive betrayal. "Do not ruin this evening with your attitude." I did not even look at him. I simply turned and walked out the front door. I heard Vanessa scoff behind me, muttering something to my mother about how I always had to make everything about myself. Stepping into the cool night air felt like waking up from a 27-year coma. I walked down the driveway to my car, unlocked it, and slid into the driver's seat. I did not turn the key in the ignition. I did not cry. My hands were perfectly steady, entirely devoid of the anxiety that used to plague me whenever I upset my parents. I reached into the back seat, pulled my work laptop out of my leather tote, and rested it on the steering wheel. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully drained my bank account, stolen my grandmother's legacy, hijacked my creative property, and locked me into a corner where I had no choice but to smile and take it because we were family. But they forgot one incredibly crucial detail. They had built their entire luxury house of cards on my professional reputation, and I was the only person holding the structural beams in place. I opened my email client. The screen cast a pale, bluish glow in the dark cabin of my car. I decided to be surgical. Clean, strictly professional, and absolutely devastating. First, the venue. The historic botanical estate that Vanessa had been bragging about to Preston's high society friends. The only reason a prime Saturday date had been secured for them without a massive, non-refundable 50% upfront deposit was because the venue director, Marcus, owed me a massive favor for bailing out a catastrophic corporate gala the year prior. He had placed a courtesy hold on the calendar strictly on my word. I drafted a direct message to Marcus. Good evening, Marcus. Please be advised that I am formally withdrawing my professional endorsement and personal affiliation with the Hayes Sterling wedding. Effective immediately, I am no longer serving as a liaison or financial guarantor for this event. Please proceed with your standard contractual and billing requirements. Best regards, Clara. By standard requirements, I knew exactly what that meant. Without my corporate backing, Marcus's finance department would automatically generate an invoice for the full luxury deposit, easily $40,000, due within 24 hours, or the date would be instantly released to the public waitlist. Send. Second, the floral designer. Vanessa had stolen my white wisteria suspended installation concept, but she was only able to afford the execution of it because the designer, Elena, was a close industry friend of mine. I had secured Vanessa a staggering 40% vendor discount completely under the table, using my firm's volume purchasing power. New email. Hi, Elena. I need to update my corporate roster. The Hayes Sterling event is no longer operating under my firm's umbrella or my personal professional network. Please remove my discount code from their file and adjust their billing to your standard retail pricing. I apologize for any administrative inconvenience. With a single click, I just added roughly $25,000 of unexpected costs to Vanessa's floral budget. Send. Finally, the transportation and logistics. The fleet of vintage luxury vehicles that were supposed to shuttle Preston's wealthy guests from the five-star hotel to the estate. The vendor had completely waived the security retainers and delayed the payment schedule strictly based on my guarantee that my family was good for the money. New email. To the billing department. This is a formal notification that I release all personal and financial liability regarding the Hayes account. I will not be responsible for any outstanding balances, damages, or scheduling conflicts moving forward. Please contact the client directly for all deposit collections. Send. 3 emails. Less than 10 minutes of typing. I close the laptop, the sudden darkness inside the car mirroring the quiet, absolute peace settling over my chest. I did not cancel her wedding. I did not sabotage her. I did not do a single malicious or illegal thing. All I did was remove the invisible safety net I had spent my entire life weaving for them. I simply removed myself from the equation and let the brutal gravity of the real world take over. I started the engine and backed out of the driveway. I did not look back at the house. I turned my phone on silent, tossed it onto the passenger seat, and drove onto the highway. The 3-hour drive back to the city was the most liberating journey of my life. For the first time, I was not agonizing over how to make them love me. I was not carrying the suffocating weight of their financial and emotional expectations. I was just a woman driving in the dark, heading toward a life that belonged entirely to me. I arrived at my apartment just after midnight. Julian was awake, sitting on the sofa in his sweatpants, reading over some architectural blueprints under a warm lamp. He took one look at my face, put his papers down, and asked if I was okay. I sat next to him, leaned my head against his shoulder, and told him everything. The stolen trust fund, the blatant theft of my wedding designs, the gravel comment at the dinner table, and the 3 emails I had just sent from my car. Julian did not flinch. He did not tell me I was being too harsh. He did not spout empty platitudes about how family is forever. He just wrapped his arm around me, kissed the top of my head, and said the exact words that solidified why I was going to marry him. Good, he whispered. Let them pay full price. I went to sleep that night feeling lighter than air, completely undisturbed by guilt. But while I was sleeping peacefully in Julian's arms, the automated billing systems of 3 major luxury vendors were waking up. The financial grace period I had extended to my family was officially over. And when the sun rose, the Hayes family was going to wake up to a catastrophic reality check they could not manipulate their way out of. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was streaming through the bedroom window, painting warm stripes across the floor. I could hear Julian in the kitchen grinding coffee beans. For a few blissful minutes, I just lay there, soaking in the profound, absolute silence of a life that finally belonged only to me. Then, I reached for my phone on the nightstand. I had turned it on silent the night before, which was a blessing, because the screen was currently a chaotic mosaic of panicked notifications, over 100 missed calls, dozens of text messages, a full voicemail inbox. The Hayes family was in the middle of a 5-alarm fire, and the progression of their voicemails told a beautiful, pathetic story of their descent from arrogance to absolute terror. I sat up, pulled my knees to my chest, and pressed play on the first voicemail. It was from my mother, left at 8:30 in the morning. She sounded annoyed, treating the situation like a minor clerical error that I had clumsily caused. "Clara, pick up the phone. Marcus from the estate just sent your father an invoice for a $40,000 deposit due by 3 o'clock today. He mumbled something about your corporate hold being lifted. Call him immediately and fix this before Preston's mother finds out we do not have the venue secured. You are being ridiculous." I took a slow breath and hit next. The second voicemail was from Vanessa, left an hour later. The annoyance had vanished, replaced by venomous rage. "You jealous, spiteful loser," she hissed into the receiver. "Elena just sent me a revised floral contract. Why did my total jump $25,000 overnight? She said your discount code is invalid. You are deliberately trying to ruin my wedding because you cannot afford one like it. Fix this right now, or I swear to God, I will never speak to you again." I almost smiled at that threat. Not speaking to me was supposed to be a punishment, but to my ears, it sounded like a vacation. The third voicemail, left right around noon, was from my father. His voice lacked any trace of his usual smug authority. He sounded breathless. He sounded like a man who had just realized he was standing on the edge of a financial cliff with no parachute. "Clara, please answer the phone. The transportation company is threatening to pull the entire luxury fleet unless we wire the full security retainers today. Your mother is hysterical. Vanessa is crying in the bathroom. We do not have $70,000 in liquid cash to drop in a single afternoon. You have to call these people back. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Vouch for us. We are family. You cannot do this to us. You cannot do this to us." That phrase echoed in the quiet of my bedroom. They still did not understand. I had not done anything to them. I had not hacked their bank accounts, or spread vicious rumors, or ruined Vanessa's dress. I had simply stepped out of the way. I had stopped shielding them from the reality of their own exorbitant choices. They wanted to live like royalty on stolen money? Fine, but they were going to have to pay the royal price tag. I got out of bed, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a cup of coffee. Julian leaned against the counter, watching me. He did not ask what the voicemails said. He could read my face. I set my mug down, opened the group chat containing my mother, my father, and Vanessa, and typed the single sentence I had been saving in my mind since the night before. "Do not beg the gravel to save your crown." I hit send. Then I went into my settings, blocked all 3 of their numbers, muted their email addresses, and set my phone face down on the marble counter. Over the next few weeks, the fallout reached me through the industry grapevine and mutual acquaintances. It was a spectacular, quiet implosion. The Hayes family could not go to Preston or his wealthy parents for help. The entire foundation of Vanessa's relationship was built on the illusion that she came from the same upper-crust, financially untouchable world that he did. Asking her future in-laws for $70,000 to cover basic vendor deposits would have shattered the mirage instantly. Preston's mother, a woman who judged people by their zip codes and country club memberships, would have smelled the desperation and canceled the wedding herself. So, my parents had to scramble in the dark. I heard through a former colleague that my father had quietly liquidated his emergency retirement portfolio, taking a massive tax penalty in the process. My mother's boutique, which was already struggling, suddenly announced a massive clearance event to drum up fast cash, heavily discounting inventory just to make payroll. They maxed out high-interest credit cards to cover the sudden retail pricing of the suspended wisteria florals Vanessa had stolen from my mind. They kept the venue, they kept the flowers, they kept the luxury cars, because for people like my family, admitting defeat is a fate worse than death. They would rather drown in debt than let their audience see them sweat. But the stress of maintaining the lie was rotting them from the inside out. Behind the glossy social media posts and the staged dress fittings, it was a nightmare. Vendors whispered about my mother's frantic, tight-lipped arguments over payment schedules. Vanessa was reportedly snapping at everyone, her perfect influencer facade cracking under the pressure of a budget she could no longer control. Meanwhile, my life moved forward with beautiful, effortless peace. Julian and I spent our weekends planning our own future. We found a stunning, intimate greenhouse conservatory just outside the city limits. It had exposed brick, creeping ivy, and glass ceilings that let the starlight pour in. It did not require $40,000 deposits or performative champagne towers. We hired a local chef who specialized in family-style dining. We invited only the people who had consistently shown up for us in the real world. Every choice we made was a deliberate rejection of the toxic pageantry I had grown up with. We were not putting on a show for strangers, we were building a marriage. I did not miss them. I did not feel a single drop of the guilt I had been conditioned to feel my entire life. Every time I looked at the stolen wisteria designs Vanessa kept posting online, I did not feel angry. I just felt a deep, profound pity. She was spending a fortune my parents did not have to buy the illusion of a life she had not earned. The dominoes were falling, piece by piece. Debt, lies, and extreme vanity create a very fragile house, and as Vanessa's extravagant wedding day finally approached, I knew the real consequence was not the money they had lost. The real consequence was the marriage she was about to step into, and the horrific reality of what happens when the applause finally stops. The day of Vanessa and Preston's wedding arrived with the kind of forced, manic energy that always precedes a disaster. I did not attend. I spent that Saturday afternoon upstate with Julian, hiking a trail that overlooked a quiet, glassy lake, my phone safely tucked away in my backpack. But in the digital age, you do not have to be in the room to witness the performance. By Sunday morning, my social media feeds were flooded with the visual evidence of their exorbitant day. The photos were heavily filtered, glossed to perfection, and aggressively curated. There was the 10-tier champagne tower. There was the custom silk gown. And there, hanging over the dance floor, was the massive, sprawling installation of white wisteria. My design, my vision. Bought with my grandmother's stolen money and my parents' maxed-out credit cards. To the untrained eye, it looked like a fairy tale. But to anyone who knew how to read the subtle body language of high society, the cracks were glaringly obvious. In the candid shots, Preston looked less like a man in love and more like a corporate executive posing beside an expensive new acquisition. My mother looked gaunt under her heavy makeup, the strain of $70,000 in sudden debt tightening the corners of her smile. My father looked aged, his posture hollowed out by the weight of the financial ruin he was actively trying to hide. Vanessa smiled in every picture, but her eyes were completely dead. She had secured the crown, but the throne was sitting on quicksand. The hangover of their performance did not hit immediately. It took about 6 months for the reality of their choices to completely dismantle their lives, and when it happened, the collapse was absolute. Debt has a terrifying way of stripping away the illusion of control. By winter, my father's desperate financial maneuvers caught up with him. Liquidating his retirement portfolio had triggered massive tax liabilities he could not afford to pay. My mother's boutique, unable to restock inventory after the heavy discounting she used to fund the wedding, quietly closed its doors in January. There was no grand announcement, just a handwritten sign on the window and a silent retreat into obscurity. Without the boutique and without his savings, they could no longer afford the mortgage on the sprawling suburban house where I had spent my childhood being told I was never quite good enough. They were forced to put it on the market, quietly selling it at a loss just to avoid foreclosure. The stage where they had spent decades acting like local royalty was gone. But the most poetic tragedy belonged to Vanessa. Preston Sterling did not marry my sister because he cherished her soul. He married her because she fit seamlessly into his country club aesthetic. He thought he was marrying into a family with equal standing, equal wealth, and equal connections. When my parents' financial house of cards collapsed, bringing immense social embarrassment to the Sterling name, Preston's affection evaporated overnight. Word reached me through the industry grapevine that Preston had become cold, critical, and entirely emotionally absent. He traveled constantly for work. He openly mocked Vanessa's lack of a career. He controlled her spending, humiliated her in front of his wealthy friends, and reminded her daily that she brought absolutely nothing of value to their marriage. She had traded her family's financial stability for a man who looked at her the exact same way my parents had always looked at me, like an object meant to serve an image. She had stolen my beautiful wisteria designs to fake a perfect wedding, but she lacked the actual substance required to build a perfect marriage. The flowers wilted, the applause stopped, and she was left completely alone with a man who did not even like her. I had been entirely no contact with them for nearly 8 months when they made their final, desperate attempt to reach me. It was a Tuesday evening. Julian and I were sitting at our dining table, finalizing the seating chart for our own wedding, when a video call popped up on my laptop from an unknown email address. Against my better judgment, curiosity won. I clicked accept. The screen flickered, and I found myself looking at my family. They were sitting close together on a cheap sofa in what looked like a cramped, dimly lit rental apartment. The transformation was shocking. My father looked 10 years older, his pride entirely broken. My mother was weeping, not her usual theatrical crying, but the ugly, silent tears of a woman who had finally run out of lies. And beside them sat Vanessa. She was wearing no makeup, her hair was pulled back in a messy knot. She looked incredibly small and deeply, terribly tired. For a long moment, the digital silence between us was heavy. Then, my mother spoke. Her voice trembled. "Clara," she whispered, "please do not hang up." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my face perfectly neutral. I did not say a word. "We lost everything," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "The house is gone. The store is gone. Vanessa is moving back in with us. Preston served her with divorce papers yesterday. He has an army of lawyers, Clara. He is leaving her with nothing." My father looked at the camera, his eyes red. "We made mistakes, Clara. We were foolish. We let the pressure of keeping up appearances blind us to what really mattered. We treated you terribly. We are so sorry." Then, Vanessa finally looked up. Her eyes met mine through the screen, stripped of all the arrogant, golden child entitlement she had wielded like a weapon her entire life. "I am sorry," she croaked, her voice cracking. "I am so sorry I took your money. I am sorry I took your designs. He was horrible to me, Clara. He was a monster. I have nothing left." They were apologizing. It was the exact moment I had fantasized about when I was an unloved teenager crying in my bedroom. The validation, the admission of guilt, the realization of my worth. But sitting there, looking at the wreckage of the people who had called me gravel, I realized something profound. Apologies born of desperation are not apologies at all. They are rescue flares. They did not suddenly realize my humanity. They realized my utility. They were bankrupt, facing a brutal divorce against a wealthy legal team, and they desperately needed the one person who always knew how to fix impossible disasters. They needed their workhorse back. I looked at them, feeling a deep, quiet pity, but absolutely no obligation. "I appreciate your apology," I said, my voice calm and steady, But acknowledging the damage you caused does not mean I am required to help you rebuild. You traded my future to buy an illusion. Now you have to live in the reality that is left behind. Clara, please, my mother wailed, reaching a hand toward the camera. We are your family. We need you. We have no one else. I reached out and placed my hand on the keyboard. Family is supposed to be the first place a person learns dignity, not the place they lose it, I told them. You taught me that my value was only ever tied to what I could provide for you. I believed you. I built my life around that lesson. Now you have to live with it too. Do not call me again. I ended the call. The screen went black, cutting off my mother's crying. I closed the laptop, exhaled a long breath, and turned to Julian. He reached across the table and took my hand, squeezing it gently. The ghost of my past was finally, permanently gone. A month later, Julian and I were married. We stood inside a historic greenhouse, surrounded by creeping ivy, candlelight, and 40 of the most genuine, loving people in our lives. There were no imported orchids. There was no champagne tower. There was no desperate need to prove our worth to strangers. I walked down the aisle toward a man who loved me exactly for who I was, not for what I could fix for him. When I looked out at the small crowd of smiling faces, I did not think about the stolen money, the stolen designs, or the family I had left behind. I thought about the sheer, undeniable beauty of the life I had built with my own 2 hands. If there is a lesson to be learned from the Hayes family, it is that favoritism is a poison that eventually kills the entire tree. It damages the child who is neglected, but it completely hollows out the child who is worshipped. It teaches the favorite that love is merely indulgence, leaving them totally defenseless against the brutal reality of the real world. And for the child who was overlooked, the child who was told they were nothing but gravel, it teaches the most valuable lesson of all. Healing begins the exact moment you stop begging for fairness from people who profit from your pain. Protecting your peace is not cruelty. Walking away from those who only recognize your worth when they need to exploit it is not an act of vengeance, it is simply self-respect. People often believe that a story ends the moment you walk away. They think that once the villain is defeated or the toxic family is left behind, the screen fades to black and nothing else happens. But real life does not have a credits sequence. The years keep moving, and sometimes the universe has a very precise, ironic way of showing you exactly how the scales have balanced. 3 years passed after I hung up that final video call with my family. 3 years of absolute, uninterrupted peace. Julian and I did not just build a beautiful marriage, we built an empire. We combined his architectural expertise with my operational logistics to launch our own boutique event design firm. Without the suffocating weight of my family constantly draining my energy, my career exploded. We went from planning small, intimate weddings to orchestrating massive, high-profile corporate galas and charity events across the country. I was respected, I was highly paid, and most importantly, I was free. I had not heard a single word from my parents or Vanessa since that night. I knew from distant mutual acquaintances that my parents had moved into a small apartment in a completely different city, too ashamed to show their faces in their old social circles. I knew Vanessa's divorce from Preston had been brutal, leaving her with massive legal debt and absolutely no spousal support, because Preston's lawyers had easily proven she brought zero financial assets into the short-lived marriage. But I never dug for the details. I simply did not care anymore. Until a crisp Friday afternoon in October, my firm had been hired to produce the annual gala for a massive pediatric research foundation. It was a $3 million production held at the city's Museum of Modern Art. I was the executive director of the event. I was standing on the loading dock behind the museum, wearing a tailored black suit, a headset resting over one ear, holding a clipboard as I checked in the final vendor deliveries before the red carpet opened. We were waiting on a secondary floral supplier, a wholesale vendor hired strictly to provide bulk greenery for the entrance arches. A plain, unmarked white delivery van backed into the loading bay, 10 minutes behind schedule. I checked my watch, feeling a brief flash of irritation. The driver, a gruff older man, hopped out and opened the rear doors. "Sorry we are late, ma'am," he called out to me. My assistant will start unloading the water buckets right now. A woman stepped out of the passenger side of the van. She was wearing a faded gray polo shirt with the wholesale company's logo embroidered on the chest, stained with water spots. Her hair was tied back in a messy, practical ponytail. She reached into the back of the van, grunting as she hauled out two heavy, sloshing, galvanized buckets filled with wet floral foam and eucalyptus branches. She turned around and began walking up the concrete ramp toward me. She stopped dead in her tracks. The water in the buckets sloshed over the edges, splashing onto her canvas sneakers, but she did not seem to notice. Her face went completely pale. It was Vanessa. For 10 long, agonizing seconds, the loading dock was completely silent except for the hum of the museum's generator. I looked at the woman who had once stood in a custom silk gown, drinking champagne paid for with my stolen grandmother's trust fund. The woman who had laughed when my mother called me dirt. The woman who had stolen my designs to fake a life of luxury she never earned. Now she was hauling dirty water buckets for a minimum wage vendor at an event that I was running. I could see the frantic calculations happening in her eyes, the shock, the utter, devastating humiliation. She looked at my tailored suit. She looked at the headset, the clipboard, the team of event staff waiting behind me for my instructions. She realized in that one agonizing moment the massive, insurmountable gap between our lives. She opened her mouth. Her lips trembled. I think she wanted to say my name, or maybe she wanted to turn around and run back to the van. I did not let her do either. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not offer her a dramatic monologue about karma. I looked at her with the exact same polite, sterile professionalism I would offer to any other delivery worker. I tapped my pen against the clipboard. The staging area for the bulk greenery is through the double doors. Take an immediate left down the service hallway, I said, my voice perfectly level. Please ensure the floor is wiped down if any water spills. We have a strict safety protocol for this venue. Vanessa swallowed hard. A deep, flushed red color crept up her neck, staining her cheeks. The golden child, completely stripped of her crown. She lowered her eyes to the concrete floor. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. She walked past me, carrying the heavy buckets, her shoulders slumped under the weight. I watched her disappear through the service doors. I did not feel a rush of vindictive joy. I did not feel the need to call Julian and brag about what I had just seen. I just felt a profound sense of closure. People who rely entirely on manipulation, theft, and appearances will eventually find themselves standing empty-handed in the real world. They spend their lives building facades, terrified of the day the wind will blow it all down. But when you build your life on hard work, resilience, and genuine character, no one can ever dismantle your foundation. My mother was right about one thing all those years ago at the dinner table. She said that diamonds and gravel do not hold the same value. She thought she was insulting me. She thought she was telling me I was worthless. But diamonds are just fragile, expensive rocks meant to be looked at. They serve no practical purpose other than vanity. Gravel is what you use to build roads. Gravel is what you pour into the earth to create a solid, unbreakable foundation that can withstand any storm. It holds the weight of empires. I turned my back to the loading dock, pressed the button on my headset to signal my team that we were ready to begin, and walked inside to run my masterpiece. I left Vanessa behind me, exactly where she belonged, in the past.